$700. $700? What? And no disc drive, not even a freaking stand to prop the console up? Are you kidding me? Oh my god. Oh man, it's been a couple of days since all this went down, but it's still freaking funny to just believe that any of this is even happening. I can't say I'm surprised, but the funniest part about all of this, besides the PS5 Pro itself just being so unimpressive, is just how shocked everybody is. Look at all these comments, man. No, I'm not sure what Sony is smoking having the top tier console not have a disc drive. Insane. $700? No disc drive, no stand? Incredible. Did Sony get possessed by Apple? 800 euros for a digital-only console without even a stand? Guys, what was your first clue? Has anyone been paying attention to the last handful of years? Yes, Sony is trying to be Apple. And those of you who have been touting PlayStation as the best ever have allowed this to happen. They are now Apple, and they know they can get away with it. Remember when Apple made a circus out of charging cables and invented like 20 different types of USBs? It was pretty annoying, right? And remember how often we joked about how Apple expects $2,000 from us anytime they put out a new iPhone that's like 4% thinner than last year's model? And we know how Apple brands itself as the premium experience for phones. And their ads and branding are made in a way that they want us to perceive them as such. They want us to view them as the premium experience, the future, the innovators, the brand that can be expensive but will promise you the best possible product that money can buy. Yet I still hear about overheating, frequent crashing, fragile casing, still the same OS and assembly problems that existed back when I was in high school. And gee, why does this all sound very, very familiar? Has Sony pulled ludicrous moves in its own hardware? Well, my fat boy PS3 could play PS2 and PS1 games, but the PS3 Slim can only play PS1 games on disc, but not PS2 games. PS4 can't play any of the games that came before it unless you buy the digital versions. And PS5 can read Ultra HD discs, which can hold 50 to 100 gigabytes of storage, but the discs themselves have just been rendered into being keys for digital versions of games. So in short, hardware problems that have led to confusion for the customer, which, to me, sounds like a very Apple move, but hey, that's one problem, you know? Not every company can be perfect. But has Sony used their marketing to paint themselves in a way that people would see PlayStation as the premium experience, the future of video games, the innovators, the brand that can be expensive but will promise you will have the best possible product that money can buy? Well, let's see. They were the first to make an excuse for raising the price of their games to $70 before any other AAA game company followed suit. And then according to a Bloomberg article, Sony even considered raising prices beyond that before they made their case for the increase. And a Sony spokesperson even added that only the biggest first-party titles would retail for $70. And what about all that talk of, we want to be the Nike of gaming gear? And yet, there have been no games that show why a PS5 is needed outside of faster load times and smoother frame rates, which, don't get me wrong, are really nice to have, but Spider-Man 2 didn't really amaze anybody, neither did Ratchet, neither did Returnal. My PS5 will crash from the dumbest things, like when I'm simply trying to power on the damn thing, to even when I'm trying to turn it off, or it will just outright refuse to boot up a game unless I restart the entire console. But sure, let's buy into this talk of the premium experience and all this talk with the PS5 Pro now of PlayStation Super Resolution. What does that even mean? So yes, to answer your guys' problems, your question, yes, Sony is trying to be Apple, and they think they are Apple. You can see it in how they've conducted business over the last decade. The other reason I laugh at this whole situation is just how so many are all shocked Pikachu face over this, and are only now talking about graphics not being a big deal in video games. As I said in my video about Concord, I remember many years of my life when people would say how a game looked so good and obsessed over graphics for decades. Even in the PS4 years, this talk was rampant as people scrambled for the newest games with high visual fidelity while bragging about getting bigger and bigger TVs while complaining about so many games still looking horrible. I guess graphics are just never good enough. That said, what's wrong now, tech bros? Don't you want your in-game leaves looking 1/16% more crisp and detailed while you play your video game? Why are you even playing your video game when you could be standing around and really taking in the super resolution and how things 500 feet away from you are not as pixelated as they were on the last gen hardware? Yeah, that's what video games are meant to be for. They're not meant to play them. They're meant to wander around like you're at Disney World. Look at the Epcot flower gardens. Who cares about Test Track? Look at how finely formed this hedge looks. Amazing. I find it really funny how suddenly there's this general attitude about graphics no longer mattering in video games, all because Sony announced new hardware with a high price tag that somehow nobody saw coming. You're really that surprised that Sony's charging $700 for this stupid thing?
In North America, the PlayStation 3 will be available at retail on November 17th, 2006. The 20 gigabyte PlayStation 3 will retail for $499 US dollars and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60 gigabyte PlayStation 3 for $599 US dollars, $659 Canadian.
And yet, again, Sony has spent years making Apple-like moves while we continued talking up how games look like shit because they didn't look hyper-realistic. And then Sony puts out a game with high visual fidelity and all of a sudden, oh, it looks so amazing. Oh, it's so good. It looks so good. You want hyper-realism so bad? Why don't you go frolic in creepypasta, okay? It's nothing but hyper-realistic over there. And if you really care about how a game looks, then you need to have some general understanding of how art works and what makes for a readable user interface. Those are what make a video game look good. And if you still think resolution and realism are what make good graphics, I gotta ask, how are you playing your video games? Eyes glued to the screen, microscopic lens hovering over pixels just to make sure no sharp edges can be seen? Scanning over every part of your TV to make sure nothing looks like it might be rendering in? I don't know about you, but I'm playing my video games in a way that they're meant to be played. You know, controller with hand, you push buttons and the buttons do things. I'm too busy trying to make sure I'm not dying and having to redo puzzles or combat scenarios so that I can keep playing my video game. I don't care about Aloy's peach fuzz getting rendered in 8K. I don't care about Kratos' nose hairs being ultra smooth and super resolution with advanced ray tracing. Like, who's really asking for these things? Is this really why people were hyped up for like 2-3 years for the mid-gen refresh? Sorry you're disappointed now all of a sudden. I don't know what you were expecting. We really shouldn't be so outraged, though, over Sony slapping such a ludicrous price tag on this thing. As I've said in previous videos, gaming is a luxurious hobby, and luxurious hobbies are often expensive. Because again, luxury. If you don't want to buy the damn thing or you can't afford it, then don't. Nobody is forcing you to do it. Why is it so bad to just play what you have? And besides, we all know the fools who will be rushing out to buy these overpriced accordions. It's the same people who bought Cybertrucks and Apple Visions. The folks who have way too much money, or as companies like Sony likes to call them, the whales. Now excuse me while I go play my video game that is meant to be played instead of wandering around and admiring the resolution, the super resolution. Oh, man. This has been a fun couple of days.